Hello, welcome to a new episode of Meet the Music. I am Tom Corley, your host. Today we're going to be speaking with a well-known figure here in the Detroit area, Professor Chris Collins. He is the Director of Jazz and Studies at Detroit's Wayne State University, and he's also the President and Artistic Director of Detroit Jazz Festival, the world's largest free jazz festival. Professor Collins is also a professional performer. He is a jazz woodwind player who has toured through Japan, South America, Europe, North America, and as a leader of his own ensembles and feature and soloists. His most recent CD release, Detours of Detroit, featuring a blend of classical and jazz elements. Professor Collins, welcome to our show.
It's my pleasure. Good to see you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. So, again, being a native from Detroit, I spot you out of the crowd. You know, I can see you a mile away because you've got that distinct look. Your dress is very stylish. The glasses are always on point as a fellow eyewear. But I just happened to come across you when you started as the president of the Jazz Festival Foundation. Is that correct?
Correct.
The foundation?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, we were aware of you because of your conversations of introducing the Jazz Festival. But tell me where it all began, because in your interviews I've seen online, I don't think you mentioned you're from Detroit, but you never mentioned, or at least I haven't picked up on, where the bug came for jazz.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, growing up in Detroit, it's hard. It's hard for jazz not to touch you. You know, I mean, it's part of our culture. It's part of our existence. And I can tell you really early on, I mean, 9, 10 years old, my dad collected kind of everything. And one of his passions, I see your sign, I love vinyl. He loved old jukeboxes full of 78s that were just about everything you could imagine. But the era that he had in the basement was just stacked with early jazz, you know. And I can remember, going through those jukebox records and hearing a lot of different things. But when I heard the likes of Coleman Hawkins was one of my earliest loves. And then Benny Goodman in the small groups, you know, Benny Goodman Trio, Benny Goodman Quartet, and Lester Young, you know, these cats, I heard something in that music that, you know, of course I didn't understand it. I just loved it. I love the way it sounded. I love the intimacy of the recordings, the organic nature, even when compared to, you know, commercially produced things of that era, much less today's era. But also there was very clear to me a combination of discipline and freedom, and almost, you know, in many ways, you could argue where your thumb's on the scale, but just in equal doses, much more than anything I'd experienced in life in general. And I found that really intriguing. And I just started really simply. I found an old clarinet in one of our closets, and my whole family, they all played instruments. I mean, we would get together, you know, on a weekend. Somebody would pull out an accordion, somebody would pull out a flute or a guitar, and they'd go at it. A lot of folk music, and so I found this clarinet. I just liked it because you got to put it together. You know, it was like a little erector set, you know.
Right.
And it was the only instrument I had, so I started to figure out what was on the records that I was hearing. I mean, I still have some of those old Coleman Hawkins records where you can just see certain tracks are like worn down from listening over and over. And you know, then I came to understand I was listening to a saxophone because clarinet didn't sound anything like it. But I started to beg my father, is there, you know, can I get a saxophone? Can I get a saxophone? And of course, he made a deal. We went out and bought a used saxophone for about $200, and I had to work that summer with him at an apartment he was working on, drywall and stuff, to pay it back. So it was a bit of but I was happy to do it because I was so excited to have a saxophone, and I just didn't know anything about the theory or music reading or anything. Just tried to learn what I heard, you know, and not even knowing what was free and what was composed. It was just question of investing. And that grew into a passion for all musics and a real love of what differentiates musics that are guided by I'll say non-artistic forces, commercial forces, industry forces, versus music that was, to as great a degree as one can get, true art music, and music that is really being guided by the artist's vision. Once I began to understand that, and it was really in high school, I had a great band director named Tom Plager, and he used to, at lunchtime we would sit and he'd play me cassettes of great jazz musicians, so I would get to know the names, and he'd loan me albums. And I can remember coming back to him one day. He gave me a cassette with a whole bunch of unnamed saxophonists on it, and I came back and I played a track, and I said, I want to know who this is. Whoever this cat is, it's blowing my mind. And it was John Coltrane. Okay. And so I found out there was a bio on John Coltrane. I read it. I talked to every musician I could. Well, you quickly become aware of what an artist's vision-driven product when you begin to explore John Coltrane. Right. And, before the interview, you had mentioned things like liner notes. Those were gold for me growing up. You could buy we didn't have a lot of resources, so everything was used record stores, in which you find at garage sales for 10 cents. But man, to read the liner notes, you begin to understand the culture of jazz, the family relationship of the artists on the album, where they came from, how they got together. Anyway, that whole intersection of craft and true art really spoke to me. I can't really tell you why. I just found it to be a beautiful expression of human existence, if you will. And also, as I grew, we all come to understand those pressures that are put upon us that either throw things in our path, we have to make a decision, or encourage us to make a decision one way or the other. Maybe it's financial, maybe it's power driven, maybe it's exposure, whatever it is. And we may make decisions that may not be in our hearts, but are for better or worse, we make because of other forces. And I really began to, look at life through that lens of developing yourself to be as good as you can be at whatever it is you're doing, whether it's communicating, whether it's just being socially polite in an environment, to work at that and be good at it. And of course, music, to invest in the craft, always with an eye to the communicative side of music, the freer expression that an artist earns in their life, and the ability then to freely manipulate the forces of that art form, which I firmly believe there's no other music that demands that of an artist the way jazz music does. So you put all that together, and it became just a philosophy of life, which led to Detroit Jazz Fest Foundation. It was a big deal when they put an active artist in as artistic director and then as president. It was a message that our festival is being guided by artists and artistry. And so whether it's Wayne State University role, my performing role, composing, or the Jazz Festival, I look at it all as just a stream of consciousness of who I am, as a musician and artist, as a person. And I bring all those worlds together. Sometimes I'll have a great professional opportunity overseas, and I'll turn it into opportunities for students and find some grant money and bring students along. Then sometimes there's a unique opportunity for the festival to have an outreach within that tour or something. Sure. And so, you're just always kind of putting it together. And as any musician will tell you, and I grew up for decades with this sensibility. I mean, you open that date book and you turn the page to the next week, and you want every date full, whether it's a gig, a commercial gig, a recording, you're writing for this Lincoln Mercury commercial, or you're doing a rehearsal with some greats, or you've been asked by a great mentor to come down and sit in on their gig. I mean, you want everything full. The old term was, if you're not earning, you're learning. There was no downtime,
Right.
So that's really what's gotten me here. And I feel very, very fortunate. I've had great opportunities, no doubt, but I look at everything, whether it's the business side to propagate this stuff or whether it's the artistic side to create it. I always look to prepare myself well, develop my historical knowledge of elements, and bring that to bear with whatever creativity God has blessed me with to move the needle, and develop into what I hope is just a good human being in the end through the road that I've chosen and that's been laid before me.
You know, having heard all of that, it just plays into what I knew from afar about you. Is that you are a giving person. You are, again, the coolest cat in the city of Detroit.
Thank
and
you.
I think you give your all in what you do. Now, I haven't been a student of yours, and I have to be honest. I stalked you on the internet, so I have seen interviews and watched interviews, and I read articles, and it's all there. It's all articulated there on the internet about you, and just seeing you around the city, and you give interviews, and how passionate you are about the whole jazz scene and music. And again, like you said, music in this facet as it is, that you contribute so much to it. And, I can go on record now by saying thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm probably sure I represent a ton of folks around this metro area, or maybe even the state that would feel that way. But so studying music, did you do that in grade school, or you did it all by ear, or did you wait till you got to high school when you became structured, or when you went to Wayne State?
It's a little bit of all of that. I mean, Let me just say right out, I've heard a lot of musicians in interviews say, well, I'm self-taught. I mean, I've heard that with pop music players, rock, jazz, everything. The reality is, I think we're all at a basal level self-taught. I mean, we may have teachers, we may have resources, or we may not. In my case, I didn't have any private teachers, so I wasn't really on any specific track. I didn't have anybody telling me what I was supposed to sound like or what was right or wrong. There's good and bad in that, of course. I didn't have a sensibility. I had to be a great reader of music before I could play music, so a lot was by ear. Even into my teens, played in a lot of bands ranging from, R&B, blues, Motown type bands, and jazz stuff. It was almost all by ear. I mean, I was just fascinated with that investment with the oral art form, right? I did learn moving forward, though, when it comes to studying and developing the craft, that is essential, and we may get to this in our conversation. In any high art form, there is a craft underlying this that one cannot ignore. And you can hear the artists that have ignored major pieces. There are holes in their playing that are consistent, and so there was an interesting path to that. There was the oral path, which can sometimes limit you or sometimes propel you, because you can hear things that you really can't understand from a theoretical point of view. But at times there are things you hear others do, or you come to an understanding through the theoretical. And that theoretical, then you have to teach to your ear, and then your ear catches up. And it's sort of this game of cat and mouse. And to that degree, I found a real passion for both sides of that equation, for being a skilled musician in any format, because I didn't want to miss a gig, as we talked about. I missed plenty of meals along the years of being a musician, just because I was committed. But so every gig mattered, man. But there's also something to be said for, if you want to understand our city, Detroit, or Chicago, or New York, you have to invest in the musics that are happening there. In Detroit, there's a lot of jazz, and there's a lot of jazz foundational things. And that's a story we've heard much, and again, we can go into, but there's a lot of musics that have grown out of jazz. There's a lot of R&B. There was so much influence of jazz and other music forms on Motown that made it so special. Sure. All that gels into the sound of Detroit. And as a musician, man, it's great to play in a traditional, real blues band where the older cats who are more, and they're not jazz players, they're blues players. And they'll look at you and say, man, don't play that chromatic stuff. Don't play that bebop stuff. This is a blues gig. And it teaches you limits, and it teaches you how vocabularies have borderlines.
Right.
And it also gives you like more colors for your palette as an artist. So you can bring in that blues, that rock influence, that classical influence into what you're doing because it becomes part of you because of the work you're doing. And to me, it's one of the great signs of a Detroit artist, man. This is I often refer to as a blue collar musician's town, not as a bad thing, but because, man, you can work here and you can work in a lot of different genres and really invest yourself and learn. Latino music in Detroit, this is a whole category of musics and stylistic proficiencies. And you're not going to get that by sitting at home with your metronome. You got to get with the real cats. I remember the first gig with a salsa band. I used to, my grandparents on my mother's side had a religious store right across from Sacred Heart Seminary on the west side, which is now very, very much woven into the whole Latino community over there, and so I knew that neighborhood pretty well, and in fact, sorry to digress, but it is a funny story. I used to sleep as a 6-7-year-old kid on the radiator behind the counter where people would pay, and I remember waking up one day, looking above me, and seeing the rosary rack on the top of the counter above my head, and all the rosaries hanging down, and then just below that, a little pocket in the counter where the butt of Grandpa's Colt 45 stuck out of the so it was rosaries and a Colt 45. Those things as a kid always made me think about dualities, and wow, this is a religious store, they're selling rosaries, but he's got to have his gun there, and but anyway, I knew that neighborhood well, and I at some point got invited to play in salsa bands. I was playing a lot of jazz and R&B and stuff, and I thought it was gonna be an easy gig, man. Go out there. It was a great gig. It started at like 11 p.m. and went till whenever. And went out there. It was one of these great salsa parties in like a warehouse in Mexican Town. And there wasn't anybody who spoke English in the band. And they launched off, and I felt like I stepped into an empty elevator shaft. All my skills didn't mean anything. The rhythms, the horn players would play their figures, and you're expected to have it the next time around, which for a jazz player you're kind of used to. But man, the rhythms of what they were playing and the interpretation, the percussiveness, what was going on was so different from what I was used to. And then, third tune in the gig, somebody shoves a pair of claves in your hand. You're like, what am I supposed to do with this? And now let me tell you, if you do it wrong, the cats are going to look at you like, what are you playing on the claves? Don't you know? So there are these languages and there are these dialects, and the more you can learn, the more you expand yourself as an artist and can bring more to the fore. And that also impacts how you teach, and it impacts how I run the Detroit Jazz Festival. It all feeds those things in a very serious way.
Well, it's an interesting point that you just made there, because I want to interject or ask two questions in there that are related to something you just said. One is, when did you get your union card? How old were you? And then I know in reading and catching the interviews, you are interested in bringing in the Latino community, or as far as Latin jazz as a genre for the festival. So has that been successful as a transition for you? I know you were talking in one interview saying you were going out to that community and reaching out to them.
Yeah, in fact, we're in an interesting point. First, it has been successful. I mean, the quick story was that when I took over in administration, I did some surveys to get some real numbers of who's coming to the festival. We had over 300,000 people, almost a third from out of the state. I mean, we got all these wonderful stats from that were real. They weren't hyperbola. And one of the things, though, that disappointed me was the numbers of self-identified Latinos in our audience were extremely low. And the issue there, and this is a little bit of quick history, but, when we talk about this music, jazz, this music that is the foundation of American culture, of all American music, it is simply woven into who we are here. But when we try to understand what happened before all of the elements existed in the United States for this music to form. There's one real significant piece. One is that much of what is jazz, much of what is rhythmically jazz and communicative and so on of jazz is traditional African, that, as you might suspect, came, looking at where jazz gave birth, came through the slave trade.
Right.
It was music. Yeah, it was a cultural element. But in the U.S., as many people know, slaves in large part were not allowed to practice their traditional music, dance, celebrations, ceremonies. Just wasn't allowed, with few exceptions. But that music, in many ways, in that culture, in many ways, did not come straight into the U.S. Much of that cultural information, cultural traditions, they were really sort of reworked through Latin-speaking countries before they arrived. The importance of Cuba and Puerto Rico and Panama and Brazil and South America in general, the importance of these Latin-speaking countries to what we now call jazz, what we now call American music, cannot be understated. In fact, if the famous quotes by Jelly Roll and others, Fats Waller, they talk about the Latin feel of jazz or the Latin tinge of jazz. You look back at the cats that were actually in the early Storyville, New Orleans bands. There's a lot of Latino cats in those bands, and I mean cats coming up from different parts of the world that are not American. And in fact, there's some wonderful research projects. It's taken all this time, but there are some wonderful research projects going on that are identifying and celebrating those musicians. There's a wonderful saxophonist who is the wife of Danilo Perez and Patricia Perez, and she's doing a research project specifically on the Panamanian musicians that were involved in the very earliest days of jazz in the United States. So you get my point. A lot of the traditional African stuff was translated through the Latino countries, Latin-speaking, Spanish-speaking countries, and then came into the U.S. mostly through ports like New Orleans, and thus gave birth to this. So when you realize that is the underpinnings of everything, to not have a robust relationship, engagement with the Latino artists, the Latino patrons, the Latino communities and cultures in our own community at the Detroit Jazz Festival, I found that something that had to be addressed. So we started a Latino outreach program, and I started it very organically. I didn't want to just come busting in. Here's a jazz festival, get out of the way. We're going to set up a stage in the middle. No, we went and we made some relationships with some of the organizations that were well rooted in our Latino communities in Detroit. An example was like FREC, the Ford Resource and Engagement Center, and they do a lot of stuff. They provide lawyers and accountants and translators and all kinds of stuff in our community. So we went there and found out they have different things every week or two, different events, different activations. So we asked, can we do something? And there were some educational things we could do. There were some concerts we could do with them, and some concerts where we would just come in with jazz, concerts where we would bring in important Latino artists with us. We were all learning and engaging. We decided we needed to translate more of the Detroit Jazz Festival output into Spanish so that artists knew we had an open submission policy. They could send their music to me, that I wanted to hear from them. We wanted the patrons to know what was happening at the Jazz Festival. We got some transportation together so that, thanks to Ford, at one point we did a big jazz concert in December that had a holiday parandas as part of it, which is a Puerto Rican tradition. So we got buses, and we invited everyone to join, and we'll even pick everybody up and bring them into Midtown for the performance. I mean, whatever we could do to break down the barriers and send a message that jazz, the Detroit Jazz Festival Foundation, everything we're doing is for everyone. And that is ultimately the message. I mean, you get into these things, anyone can tell you when you see a deficiency in that there's some element that is not appropriately involved, engaged, represented in whatever you're doing, you need to put some effort there, man.
Yes,
some
sir.
effort.
Yes, sir.
right?
Okay. Yes,
And
sir.
so it's really that formula. And in the end, now I've done a number of big projects, some exchanges with Panama with professional and students, and we've commissioned some works. We've taken the All-Stars into different places. We were in 2019. I had started the Havana Detroit project, which was with Victor Rodriguez, who's the director of the Havana Jazz Festival, and Joaquin Bentecourt, a great Cuban artist and mentor in Havana, Omar Sosa, one of the great pianists from Havana, and so on and so on. And I started to go down there, made relationships, and we designed a exchange program that was intended to be a big band that was half Detroit, half Havana, with university-age students plus some mentors. We were going to write in some new music. We were going to premiere it at the Havana Festival and bring it back, the same band, and premiere it at Detroit to really show the value of when two cultures equally invest and own the output of something. The output is, no one controls it, and it's usually much more than the sum of its parts. And so that was the program. We had it started and everything was rolling. We were working ready to get visas, and our friend COVID-19 showed up. And so what we've been doing is a lot of online things, and we'll be continuing that through the end of the year. And then we're planting all the seeds and doing workshops with Cuban artists and Detroit youth to begin to prepare for when this is over and we can actually do the premiere of the bigger music. So it's an ongoing effort, along with many other efforts, of course, but it's an important one because it's a foundation of the music. And I can tell you, for every jazz musician, their first encounter with traditional Latino music, traditional Cuban music, Puerto Rican music, is an eye-opener about all these amazing possibilities for your music that you've never contemplated or studied, and it brings so much to the table. So that is how it came about where we're at. But I have a deep love because I keep learning. I keep inventing. This morning I was writing some scores, and I was really focusing on a very particular kind of 3/2 rumba clave and how I can really attend to the tradition, but also bring my American jazz into it. And how do you balance those? So, it just puts your mind in a whole new place. Beautiful.
Yeah. It's interesting that Herb Alpert had a documentary, and I kind of missed it, so I have to catch up with it. But when I was looking at interviews of his online on his Tijuana Brass project, there was a lady who wrote him a letter who said, "Thank you for bringing me or showing me the culture of Mexico through his music."
Wow.
And so, and that I found that to be kind of powerful, because when you do music, it gives you a vision, a picture of that. And so music to me is also listening, but it's also seeing, if that makes any, connection there. So with the outreach of the Detroit Jazz Festival Foundation, the outreach for that, but let me ask you, I guess I'm kind of getting ahead of myself because I wanted to close with this kind of thing, but
that's okay.
What the outreach for that Latino community, what do you think the piece would be to outreach for new listeners who are under 40?
Yep.
Because when you go to festivals and you go to concerts, they're 40 plus, white hair, canes, walkers. So how do I know the pipeline for musicians is there, through the public school systems and universities. In fact, universities, that's where, jazz stations are at now. We lost our JZZ, so now we rely on WEMU and RCJ, and so, and WDET. Yeah. So, so what is it that, for outreach in regards to a youthful music appreciation, I guess put it that way?
Well, and that's it, right? I mean, we another stat that I've followed closely at our jazz festival and others is the age demographics. Because we do, one of my primary goals at the Detroit Jazz Fest Foundation, since I became president in 2015, was to set a standard for maintaining excellence and propagating the Detroit Jazz Festival Foundation. So we've now archived, I think it's on its way to 15 terabytes that will be available. It's all tagged, and it's videos and audios and contracts and connections and all the stuff that can be passed on to future generations of the foundation to move forward. Processes, activations, things that are value, things that were not of value. This has never really been available before in that organization. So it's a lot of work nobody sees, but the idea of propagation of anything is something we all have to think about. Most people, we end up thinking about our own lives and careers. I mean, we propagate our family. What do we need to sustain ourselves, to be able to send our kids to college if that's their choice, or to retire and not have to be terrified we can't pay for health insurance. This is an example of everyone's personal propagation, But the other side of that then is, in a larger context, what can we do to propagate the organizations that we're involved with? And then how can we propagate what's important in our culture? And jazz being as important as it is to me, I've spent a lot of time exploring, thinking about, why is this an issue? What you just said. Well, the basics are, jazz was a popular music in the 30s, 40s. I mean, we can dissect the difference between the art music of Duke Ellington and the dance music of Glenn Miller, and there's commercial forces at play here and so on and so forth. But the reality is that music, that instrumental style, improvisation, the individuals, the culture of jazz was popular, and it attracted a huge following, and it became the music of young people of that era. It became the music that, excuse the term, but pissed off their parents, right? Like we do every generation, to define themselves, right? And there's some great articles. There's a Chicago Tribune, I think it was, article from the 20s, early 30s, saying, we have identified now 59 girls who have fallen to the, hip gyrating, sinful music of jazz, those kind of headlines. And so it was really looked down, and we've heard that, right? We've heard that before with hip hop music, with rock and roll, with video games, right? But the reality is, the evolution of anything, art or craft, has to be allowed to exist, and in this music it has. So that's why there are a lot of older generations. There were huge numbers invested in this music, and they've aged. But the beauty of the art form and the beauty of jazz is that it welcomes everything and everyone. And I say that carefully, because I can tell you from a personal experience. You mentioned, when you asked earlier, I don't think I answered it, when did I get my union card? I will tell you that on another front, I can remember the first time I think 17, maybe 18 years old. At 18, I moved down to Midtown, right between Cass and Woodward on Palmer. And man, I remember getting in my car, and it was before that, so I had to be about 17, and I drove to Burt's on Jefferson. There was a jam session going on, and man, I got out of that car and I was terrified, because I felt like I did not belong here. The cats, I didn't know them, they didn't know me. I'd been working on my jazz, and I saw some friends, because some younger people, who we'd been playing together, but basically, man, you walk in there and you confront the heavies, boy, it's terrifying. But what I quickly learned is, when you start coming back, and the cats, the jazz family, they knew you're serious, and they hear you're serious, and they talk to you and you're serious, and you're investing, and you really want to be, man, the family opens up, they mentor, they support. And
in the direction of being a community.
It's very much a community, and a very powerful community. And that's why the artists are still propagating. But on another, how I applied that, though, moving forward, is I've heard we've heard so much jazz has the evolution into fusion, and the bringing rock and roll that was created from jazz, now rock and roll colors and inventions being brought back into jazz as a feeder for inspiration. Of course, Latino music, which we've mentioned, other world music forms. I mean, of course, yeah. again, so much traditional African music is this music, and it's come around and coming back in the funnel to be reinvented. And you have artists like a Robert Glasper, who's bringing strong hip hop, not only musical elements but sensibilities into what I would still consider jazz. And so there are movements like that. At Wayne State, I'm constantly working to introduce my students as much as I can and involving them in those things. At the festival, we have things like we call it the Untitled series, which is sponsored by Rocket Mortgage. And this is a series that we specifically seek out artists that are jazz artists, and I can talk all day about what I would consider a jazz artist, being that the Jazz Festival is a real jazz festival. It's not an instrumental pop festival. It's not a smooth jazz festival. It's not, it's a jazz festival. So we should probably put a definition on that. But they are jazz musicians, but they're bringing in new contemporary information that's coming from the current culture, even youth culture, and weaving it into this craft that would define it as jazz. And so I make a point to program that in particular ways and do some things. Like, for instance, I had we couldn't do it this year because we were broadcast only, but I did a special night on a Sunday. Oh man, we had I'm trying to think, Kamasi Washington was the closer, and I had, I'm struggling to remember, a straight ahead group in the middle, and then I had a young up and comer with some electronica and DJ stuff mixed in. So 3 sets over at the Chase, the big stage. And so I did a deal. All of our guardians, who are the people who they pay $500-$600 as a donation, and one of the things they get is to sit in the front gated areas in the seats, so they can sit up close to the stage. It's our thank you for their donation. We made a deal where, look, you on Sunday for that day, you can bring a disciple in if you want, somebody that you're mentoring in this music, and but they have to be under 18. We want you to bring in your grandchildren. We want you to bring in your children. Bring in your people down the street, right? And what happened? Of course, the people went crazy for it. The young people got to experience the VIP experience at the Detroit Jazz Festival. And the older crowd brought all these nephews and nieces and people they wanted. But what happened was, when Ahmad Jamal was playing, man, Grandpa was telling the kids, "What's up?" Yeah. The kids, okay. But then when Kamasi Washington came on, now all of a sudden the kids turned around. Now the kids are listening to jazz, a new reflection of the art form. And Grandma and Grandpa are like, "What is going on with the dashiki and the lights and the DJ? The guy with what's he doing?" And the kids now become the mentors. Yeah. And it's those kind of activities and activations I seek to put on the stage and to bring into the classroom, because you have to be aware of it. Now, you have to be careful on the education side, because I'm a firm believer, and at Wayne State we've done this since we started the program, which is the job there is to teach or to provide an opportunity for learning, I would say, and provide experiences for students to develop an incredibly strong complete understanding of history and tradition, and to develop their base craft. Because if you have that, man, you can go anywhere from there. And we've seen them go anywhere, as opposed to, we're not going to get rid of theory 3 and 4 and instead, just focus on how to integrate hip hop into your jazz. That's not what we're talking. That is a personal choice that is out there. But going back to what I first said, it's because the art and the musicians are open to all these influences. It's got to be sophisticated enough, though, to equal the quality and significance of the high art of jazz. It can't just be a jazz trio on this side of the stage and a DJ and a rapper on that side. And go ahead, guys, make some magic for us. We've seen that, right? Mm-hmm. But then we've also seen Herbie Hancock with a bunch of younger cats in his band. Cameron Graves was in his band, right? Not playing the piano at all electronics, and bringing Common onto stage to do a very particular rap element. We've seen that develop, and there's a beauty in that is speaking to what you're talking about. And I would say jazz is always going to be a high art form. It is always, you're only going to fully appreciate it, as you know, as a great listener, the more you invest in understanding it, reading the liner notes. That's why it's so cool you said that, to get a background, understand what were the goals of the artist, what was happening in the studio, and that you gain a much more a proficient and deep appreciation for what you're hearing. And then when you go hear the Cats live and it's different from the record, now you understand the subtleties of what's being changed, all that. And so there's always going to be a smaller population than there is for the commercially driven art forms, and those that are designed in many ways to attract large audiences. Make no mistake, record companies are not interested in a great pop singer that's only going to attract 50,000 people, right? Now, in jazz, if you sell 50,000 records in the first year, oh my gosh, you're on your way.
Yeah.
But that's not what pop record companies do. So what they're doing is they're producing and structuring and creating recordings that may have jazz elements in them. I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But they're all about money, man. They're all about corporate. Now, I don't want to downgrade guitarists like a Van Halen band or a popular modern pop vocalist saying they're not creating art, because they are. The creative process engaged, but their output is also greatly shaped by a corporate entity that is designed to make a lot of money. I'm telling you, jazz record companies, they don't get into the business to make money. Neither do jazz artists. They get into it to propagate the art.
Well, but not back in the 40s and 50s. You don't think that was the reason why labels got Verve and Blue Note? And they were before the 40s and 50s, but the artists that came out of the 40s and 50s, you think that was why? Well, I don't know.
No, ask the question. It's a good question. Go ahead.
You have Nora Jones that's on the label now with Verve. Or no, Blue Note, right? Yes,
Blue Note, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, and then you got Diana Krall. And you've got Robert Glasper, who's kind of doing well. He got the Grammy for an R&B from Virginia, but it's a I don't say transitional, but he's a trusted endorser of jazz, I guess to say.
Absolutely, and a creative artist.
Being affiliated with hip hop and R&B, that brings those who are not familiar with jazz over. I guess
you're right, and to say, there isn't great creative artists who bring in elements that make their music interesting to a wider audience, it would be wrong. I couldn't say. Of course, that's what happens. And just to, again, looking at it from a historical perspective, the rise of, from Benny Moten to Count Basie band, the development of Duke Ellington's band, and all his writing, and how that evolved. Fletcher Henderson, Don Redman, the Cats, who were the creators of the big band thing, that evolved, and it got to a point where it became popular music, right? So then record companies said, ooh, well, there's something to be had here. And you hear a lot of very popular jazz, as it was called, in the 30s, moving into the 40s, where it was dance music. Yeah, there was some improv in it, but I can tell you, the Cats in the band were often told, please play the same solo you played on the record. That's what the people want to hear. That was a common thing, right?
Yeah,
and
improvisation there at this point in dance hall was not going to.
That's right. And then you heard Duke Ellington, who wrote all his stuff, much of his stuff around the Cats, and he would do, he'd have Cootie Williams or Johnny Hodges. Playing jazz, man, within the context of it, because he wrote with them. It was a interwoven thing. There's a different level of artistry and use of craft, if you will. Not that one is better than the other, but there's one that is different than the other. And it got to the point where, part of the movement of the bebop Cats in the early 40s, where you had, Kenny Clark and Monk and Dizzy, and they're at Minton's Playhouse and place like this after their gig, going there 2 a.m. to work on their bebop. man, that was a little tiny group of people. And if you weren't in that subculture, there were no records. There was a recording strike, in fact, in the early days. So you might get lucky to hear some of the cats who were working with a swing band at the time. You might get a chance to hear them play, like a Charlie Christian, father of bebop guitar. He was playing with Benny Goodman. So on some of Benny Goodman's recordings, you can hear this transition to the artistry and the depth of bebop. But a lot of that subculture was about, we got to get this music back to the creative improvisation, open, or first of all, difficult to play. So a popular swing band musician would come up on the bandstand with Bird and Diz and wouldn't know what the heck was going on and look the fool for it, not just because they were trying to make a statement. Jazz music is going to evolve here. So when I talk about, when we contemplate the idea of commercial driven musics, it's like everything, it's all little steps, right? There are some musics that clearly they're popping candy, man. They're being driven by commercialism only. And then there are musics that or artists that find a popular audience, and it's quite beautiful stuff. You mentioned Diana Krall. I mean, it's quite beautiful, elegant, well, executed, and jazz, and built on the jazz vocabulary, and coming from wonderful cats. And they have a wonderful, unique following. Then you have, the Rolling Stone level, which is, rock music that, we're not talking about the difference between a jazz cat making $20,000 at a gig and a high level, well-known jazz cat making $100,000 at a gig. You're talking about people who, they may not even take the gig, and they might be offered $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 plus a portion of the door. I mean, we're talking about wide, variations here. That being said, going back to your original thought, it is imperative that jazz musicians, just like a classical musician, would invest intensely in the history and the development of the language and integrate all that and bring that into who they are, but don't get lost in the history. There are plenty of cats who are playing one particular thing, even copying one particular musician for their whole lives, But jazz, like any art, it insists to evolve, and where a lot of the fodder that comes for evolution is from the here and now, this moment. And that's why I think that will be the answer to whatever degree, to bringing in new demographics, with the understanding that it is a high art, and it is happening at a heady level that does require some investment that many people are not interested in giving. It's why you don't go to the Detroit Institute of Arts and see thousands of people clamoring to see, the Van Gogh in the corner. It's amazing, and and the people who appreciate it are speechless. When I first saw it, they had a Whistler's display, and went through it. When I first saw the breadth of Whistler's work, it took my breath away. It was American art, but it was emotional, I don't have that reaction to a lot of paintings. And the same thing with jazz. Jazz is always going to, require some investment by the listener to appreciate. But at the same time, it's ready, willing, and able to evolve and take in anything that's happening now or in the future. And that, to me, answers the question, I think, of our day. I think we talked about, is jazz dead? And, jazz can't be dead because it's woven into. It's like saying we're not going to have, the beards are dead, but you know what? You wake up in the morning, guess what? You got to shave again, buddy. It's who we are. It's woven into who we are as a culture and as a people, particularly here in Detroit. But the music itself, we have to really understand the definition of what is jazz and where it's come from, to understand really where it exists still and where it's growing and bristling, and understand it's just not 1958 Miles Davis or 1929 Duke Ellington. It is a continuum, and it continues to aspire and grow and change. And what it will be in 50 years, I don't know. But if it's based on the history and the language that is the definition of this art, and then it evolves and moves on from there, it is jazz, and we'll see what that might be.
Yeah. Well, we've only got probably 10 minutes of an hour that you're somewhat committed to, and I don't
Great,
want
sure.
I don't want to miss out on a couple of things. I want to hit you kind of like rapid fire situation.
Do it. I'll do it. I'll keep my answers a little brief. And your questions are great. That's why we're talking so much.
Yeah. So now there's streaming services, and jazz is being exposed there. In fact, Spotify says 90% of jazz, jazz is being streamed. 90% of jazz is being streamed. Does that make sense? Wait a minute. Did I say that correctly? Jazz music on Spotify is being not downloaded, but streamed 90% of the time.
Yeah.
So that in itself is kind of eye-opening. Then the other thing I wanted to mention is contextualizing jazz music. You've got lo-fi jazz, you've got jazz hop, you've got cafe jazz, you've got Friday jazz, you've got driving jazz. I mean, I guess that however you get it out there is probably the best. And then it has a mixture of, big band, fusion, avant-garde. I mean, it has all of that when I listen to it. But it's getting to the masses that way. And I guess that's a good thing. But if you were to talk to someone who was been under a rock and just came from under it, and they were living in the middle of the country, what would you suggest that they, how would they find an appreciation for jazz by what artist, maybe what soundtrack, or what would you suggest to someone who wants to get started listening to jazz?
Yeah, well, as a listener, I would just say this. I'll ask you the question. Could you imagine just have streamed or going to YouTube and tripped across in early 1960s John Coltrane's Giant Steps and listened to it once and then moved on? It doesn't do it, does it? You got the tempo. Okay, it's blah 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 blah, but move on. No, I mean that's the challenge of streaming. But at the same time, like every other technology, we're still in the infantile stages. People are going to figure out how to integrate it in their lives. But I would say that, for sure, you need to approach jazz with an open mind. Come down to the jazz festival, go to a jazz club, and do not assume what's going to be there, because you're probably going to be wrong. We have 4 stages at the Jazz Fest, as you know, and I do that because I want people to wander around. Experienced listeners who maybe never heard Macy Gray before, right? Singing jazz, she singing Duke Ellington, man, and neophytes who don't know who Chick Corea is, and they walk around the corner and they sit down on the stage and let it wash over you. First thing, open mind, and let take on the experience. But then, if you really want to listen to jazz, if you really want to start to invest in understanding why is this important, spend a little time, find something you like, and spend a little time with it. Understand the artists behind it, their goals, some of the liner notes, some of the stories behind the classic recordings are phenomenally fascinating and help you understand why a cat played this way or that way on it, or why, people talk about Charlie Parker, some of his famous recordings with strings, borrowed the saxophone from somebody in the band. Their kid played saxophone, so he borrowed the student's saxophone with a reed and mouthpiece and everything because he had pawned his horn, and he played one of the definitive recordings of all time. Explain that to me. That's freaking amazing. So some of that is a part of it. So it's worth investing in something you like. Now, the other thing you mentioned, though, is
I want to interject here something.
Sure.
You make it very difficult to move around at the Jazz Festival because the lineups are so tough. You don't want to lose your spot.
That's why about 3.5 years ago, I started Detroit Jazz Fest Live. Yeah. So it's a $20 subscription, and you Google Play App Store. You can see. You got to check out and say, okay, I'm gonna. Now this year, I don't know if you watched the broadcast, but it was 40+ hours, and I created a single stream of performances, so you didn't have to pick and choose. So, but I do agree, it is a challenge, but pretty good problem to have.
It is.
But Well, I'm not sure where we were going with that. You had mentioned about. I'm not sure where we were going at the last question. I kind of lost it there, but good point nonetheless.
Yeah. Yeah. So I got a quote from you here, and it's kind of ties things up for us.
Okay.
You were talking about, I think you were talking about jazz as a language,
Mm-hmm.
and you mentioned it's an ever evolving, living, breathing art form.
Mm.
And I
absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. It's you need to. When you see a painting, it is defined. When you read a great novel or a piece of poetry, it is defined. It is published. It is captured. It's not going to change without ruining it, right? Jazz music, while we publish it on recordings, they are references to what I like to think of recordings. They're the references to the evolution of a Bill Evans on piano. His whole career, you can hear John Coltrane. You can hear him go from this with Earl Bostic to that to freer elements to with Pharoah Sanders to the point where it just his spiritual interventions. You can they capture the history of an artist, but jazz music on whole can only be experienced live in real time. Now, when we broadcast 40 plus hours of Jazz Fest this year, one of my contingents for us doing it was it had to be live here in Detroit. It's not going to be Zoom concerts. It's not going to be pre-records. I want people at home to understand this is actually going on right now, because I wanted them and the artists to feel as much as we could that connectivity, because jazz live changes moment to moment. It offers that threshold to a true sense of a living, breathing art that's in constant forward evolution for every artist, for every ensemble, for every composition, for every concert, every venue. That is the trademark of jazz. We seek to evolve, to create, to spontaneously shape the output of the music. It is simply what it is. And we seek to do that as a group, not just improvise as individuals, but as a group, which means it's a community movement, a community evolution. So I think it's imperative for people to experience jazz live. And to me, the best place is still in about a 40 to 50 seat jazz club. There's nothing more I'd rather do than sit in the basement at the Village Vanguard, man, and see what's happening. Or at the Dirty Dog Jazz Cafe, or Cliff Bell's, or at Bert's, or at Baker's Keyboard Lounge. I mean, to me, that's the real. And it's like taking someone to hear the Detroit Symphony Orchestra play Mahler's Second for the first. This huge ensemble, brass that shakes your chest. In the hall, you have to be moved. Even if you don't like it at the end. You go to hear, if you really want to invest in jazz, go hear the Cats, man. Go hear them play face to face. Sit so you can feel you can't feel their breath right now, but in the future you can. And then the festival and other things, we seek to, bring that to larger audiences appropriately. But that is one of the keys to what the comment I just said. It's difficult to understand it being a living, breathing, ever-evolving art form if all you're doing is listening to records that captured something that happened a week, a year, a decade ago. So one is the publication, the capturing of an artist's development, but the real art happens live when I'm with you and with my band, and we are working to produce jazz. That is the moment, and the real beauty of it, it comes here and it's gone, man. It's gone.
Yeah.
Everyone tries to record everything these days, but man, there's some joy and beautiful energy to be experiencing something that is there one moment and forever gone the next. And man, I'm telling you, that's what jazz music is, baby.
That is a beautiful way to put it. I mean, when you mention it in that fashion, I have to go back and share my thought that way. Now, when I talk about, in particular, jazz, I'm always talking about vinyl, but I do need to tell them that you can't experience the totality of jazz by just listening to the vinyl. Yeah, that's great.
Vinyl's a good way to go, though, my friend. I spin it all day long.
It's a good start. But if I want to pull them into my world, they've got to get a taste of the closeness, the intimacy of it.
Intimacy, the
Yeah.
organics, the organic
Yeah,
nature.
yeah. So no Comerica Park in the future?
Well, we never know, right? Man, I ask the listeners to be, I keep my mind open, man. It's too big of a subject to be too definitive on.
All right. So I just want to wrap it up. You mentioned on one of your interviews or YouTube things I saw, the Jazz Festival Foundation has something coming up called Jazz in the Cellar. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we're going to be in a way of continuing to fill the digital dimension. We're going to be doing live performances followed by interviews in a small sound stage setting. So we have all the backline, all the sound here. It's all being brought at a high definition audio. We have a control booth and a full mixing situation. So what you're hearing is as good a quality as we can possibly do. But it's with bands, Detroit bands, some national artists, maybe some of the university students we're working with in unique ways. And they'll come and do 35, 40-minute performances, and then we'll do interviews on, we have literally a big red couch, and we call it interviews on the big red couch. And we talk about where they're at, what they're doing, and where they're going. But it's live in real time, and we'll be doing those starting in November. It will be a reoccurring situation once every other week. It's about an hour and 15-minute program. We are going to be offering it on Detroit Jazz Fest Live, but we will have different segments in free environments as always, Facebook Live, YouTube, stuff like that. But it's a way of having an ongoing live performance Detroit jazz thing that keeps bringing live music to all of the listeners, and also provides, frankly, another good gig for musicians to come in and help to support their financial stability, give them a reason to create new music, have a new venue. So Jazz in the Cellar starts in November, and if they follow DetroitJazzFest.org, they'll get all the information on that. It's pretty cool, hip, little, intimate scene.
Well, Professor Collins, I thank you so much for the opportunity to talk to you here on Meet the Music. And it means a lot to me that you took your time out for this particular day to share all that history, all that passion and insight, that I would take, hopefully our listeners can, from this episode, they've learned some things. So to that, I thank you for your time. You don't mind if I text you for follow-up questions, do you?
Anytime you need, and you're such an intelligent, astute person of jazz. I mean, anything I can do or anything I can help with, let me know. I wish you the best of luck with your program. I'm sure it's going to be well received. I mean, you talk about insight, and you're putting your fingers on some important questions associated with the subject at hand. So, bravo.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Yeah, next week I move on to Zydeco.
All right. I get out my washboard, man.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned something about accordion in the family, so I was like, hey.
Oh, I have a couple of records. I did some blending of Celtic music and jazz, and there's some really good accordion playing on that.
Yeah.
And washboard, by the way.
All right. All right, sir. Much appreciated.
Thank you. You have a beautiful day.
You do the same.
Thank you, man.
Stay safe.
Yeah, safe and healthy.
All right. Well, we just had a great episode with Professor Chris Collins, the Director of Jazz Studies at Detroit's Wayne State University and the President of Artistic Director of Detroit Jazz Festival. It was a great interview, a great conversation. Thank you for listening to Meet the Music and sharing our journey, our musical journey.